This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. I'm your co-host, Jonathan, and I'm with my friend and trusty co-host,
Brian.
Hey, Brian. We're now on a first name basis. We don't even say our last name now. Hopefully you've been with us for a while, so you know what we do. We interview, we explore, we look at new ways of awakening, and hopefully you'll get some really good stuff today, because we're going to be talking about books and movies that we have found to be very inspiring and helpful on our spiritual journey. And we've never really talked in depth about this before, so I'm really looking forward to it, because when you find a good book or a good movie that really touches your heart, it can inspire you to double down in your practice and look at the world a different way. And when we decided that we'd do this topic, Brian, what first occurred to you?
The first thing that occurred to me was that I don't remember all of the movies well enough to talk about all the ones that were important to me, like, movies I've seen a long time ago, and I didn't think I had time to rewatch them all. So that's when we decided to include books.
Yeah.
I can pull them off my shelf and refresh my memory really quickly.
As you know, I once went to your apartment in New York, and which is a small place because it's in New York, in Manhattan. And I was surprised to see that you had approximately more books than Barnes and Noble had in your little apartment. So I know you love books. I love movies. And so before we get into some of our top 5 or 6 favorites, which we might recommend for you, we want to talk about how to get value from them and some stories that might be helpful for you along the way. One of the things that occurs to me is the word inspiration is helpful. We want to inspire, but inspire to what? A lot of people, they just devour entertainment and they're not inspired to necessarily do anything. So when I watch a movie or a book, I am hoping that it helps me to be more disciplined or more open or more focused in my practice. That's how I think of it. Do you think of it similarly?
Yeah, I do think of it similarly, although lately they seem to be more reminders or learning how other people say the same thing, but in different words.
Yeah. And sometimes just a turn of a phrase can really impact a person.
Absolutely.
It can really change how you see something or change your perspective on something. So you never know when that's going to happen. Before we went on air, we were talking about how in The Matrix, they have that scene with the red pill and blue pill, and how that has really infiltrated the culture, that we're always at a choice to take the red pill, which is, the path of truth, or the blue pill, which is like the path of sleep and comfort. And looking at life that way, that we're always at a choice that way, can be very impactful. And of course, there's many other phrases from movies and books that can be impactful as well. So hopefully some of these things that you read or watch can inspire you to new heights. But something that occurred to me a few years ago is I had a list of my favorite 30 movies. And I realized that often I got more out of seeing a movie the second, third, fourth, or fifth time than the first time. The first time you're involved in the plot, you don't know what's going to happen. The third time, you kind of know what's going to happen. You can kind of relax with it and just slurp up all the wisdom and most impactful points and have them go in deeper, I found. So that's probably the same with a book, although I never reread books. I do listen or watch movies more than once. Do you reread books?
I do reread books, not often. So the books that I've reread are rare, although a couple of them are on my list today. And I find that reading them a second time, you're absolutely right. They go deeper when you're not so involved in the plot and what's going to happen next. But I find with movies, rewatching them fills me with awe. If it's a movie I really like, I am amazed by the artistry, by the skill, by the communicative power of a really good piece of art. And that's what happens to me when I rewatch them, as well as if there's an emotional punch. I find that that doesn't actually go dry. I mean, if it was moving the first time around, it's usually going to be moving the second and third and fourth time around, for me at least. And the same way with humor too.
Yeah. Now, a lot of times I catch new things when I see a movie several times, and that they really impact me. A friend of mine I had mentioned to him, I like the movie Peaceful Warrior. It's one of the ones I'll talk about later, which is based on the book Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And I asked him what impacted him the most, and he shared a little tidbit of the last 3 sentences in the movie, which I never even heard. I missed it completely, and I'd seen the movie like 5 times. And so I watched the movie again, and there's something he says in the last 30 seconds in the movie that has continued to impact my life. And that was like 6 months ago.
Wow.
So you just never know, how much you're missing until you see a movie 2, 3, 4 times. And there are a couple movies that I've seen more than 10 times. Just to share a funny story about that, I was once at a screening of the movie Harold and Maude, which is a cult classic. And I was kind of bragging to the person next to me because we were waiting for the movie to start. I was bragging that I'd seen this movie 15 times, which is probably more than any other movie. And she said, "Oh, that's nice. I've seen this movie 86 times." And I thought she was joking. And I said, "Oh, you're joking." She said, "No, this movie completely changed the course of my life. And in fact, I left a marriage. I started traveling around the world, all based on the character of Maude in this movie, Harold and Maude." And she said, "If you want, I can recite the entire movie to you word for word," which she started to do. And that took it to a whole new level. I was thinking, yeah, you might see a movie 3 or 4 times, but I'd never thought that a movie could completely change the course of your life. And she said she watches it every month or 2 just to be re-inspired. So this can be a science, and it can really be something that impacts our journeys in life. What movie have you seen the most, do you think?
Well, 2 movies from my childhood. The Wizard of Oz I've probably seen more than any other movie in my lifetime, but that's because we watched it every year growing up, and then many times since. The same way with the TV version of Peter Pan. But I think that the movies that I've seen most often, I guess Cabaret would be one of them, one of my all-time favorite movies, as well as Bridge on the River Kwai, which is absolutely one of my favorite movies, none of which seem to, I think, have much to do with non-dual spirituality, but they're just so wonderfully made and filled with depth and artistry.
Which brings up another important point. What a spiritual movie is to one person is a non-spiritual movie to another person. So really, we're looking for movies that impact you in a deep way or positive way. And that might be a movie that seems to have a spiritual theme, or it might be a movie that's not have a spiritual theme. I was talking to a really good friend, and I asked him what movie was his favorite spiritual movie. And he came up with the movie Rambo. And I was like, what? Because this is like a spiritual teacher friend of mine. And I said, well, what? Rambo 2, actually. And he said, well, the movie's meant to like totally exhaust you and get you into a vulnerable place. And then at the end, I guess Sylvester Stallone says something profound that just really stayed with him. Like, well, we're all just trying to love each other or something like that. I haven't seen the movie yet, but any movie can be a spiritual movie, which brings me to one of my favorite stories, which I think I've shared on Awareness Explorers before. And that is many years ago, I was a spiritual teacher to about 30 people. And we would meet every week, and I would do a satsang or something. And sometimes I would show one of my favorite movies that was so-called spiritual. But one week I couldn't be there. So I gave a friend who was going to the group a DVD, if you remember those, of a movie, which I thought was the movie Gandhi, which is an excellent movie. But in the actual sleeve was the movie Men in Black 2. And Men in Black 1 and Men in Black 3 were pretty good movies. It ends up Men in Black 2 was so panned by critics that they said it's not worth the celluloid it was printed on. So it's not a good movie. It's a bad remake of Men in Black 1. Anyways, I gave this group of people the assignment that they write about what insight, wisdom, and positive impact they got from the movie. And I thought they were watching the movie Gandhi. And when I was reading their essays about their impact, a lot of people said how amazing the movie was, that they were definitely impacted in a positive way, that it really twisted their view of reality and what's important. But one person wrote, I didn't get the movie. Why were you sending us a movie about aliens and a comedy about stupid aliens doing stupid stuff? And I go, what? Because I thought they'd seen Gandhi. Well, ends up they had seen Men in Black 2, but everybody was primed for getting a very powerful movie, a very insightful movie. So they were looking for that, and they found it in this stupid movie. So the point being is that you kind of get what you look for. If you are looking for something to impact you and be profound, you can find it even in Men in Black 2. If you're thinking a movie is stupid and boring, then even the movie Gandhi will go like, yeah, well, why'd I waste 3 hours watching that? So it was just a funny example of that. And I like to share that story.
I love that story too. I don't know whether it's a story about humans trying to please their teacher, or whether it is a movie about the nature and the communicative value of art. When one creative person puts something into it, even if they do it badly, it actually can communicate, because art is about sharing your experience, how you look at life with another person. And even when it's done badly, it can't help but do that.
Yeah. For some people.
I guess, yes, for some people.
So we're
but
going
also,
to give.
I think the third one is what you said. You can find what you're looking for. And all of life is like that. There is wisdom to be found in every single moment of life.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge the people listening to find great insight in the next thing I say, which is that if you like our podcast, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/awareness explorers. For as little as $1 or $2 a month, we can give you a bunch of extra stuff. And we really appreciate our big supporters, which have really kept us going. So thank you especially for your support. And hopefully the extra stuff that you get is inspiring your soul.
Wow, that's deep wisdom.
Wasn't that? I mean, there's all of life and wisdom and commerce and possibility in that announcement. Anyways, so why don't I start with some movies that I recommend, with the caveat that everybody has different tastes, and a little bit about why I like them. And I want to get a couple movies out of the way, in that I won't be talking about movies that you probably have seen. So, if you've seen The Matrix, yeah, that's a great movie. I found it very inspiring. If you've seen the movie Gandhi, yeah, that's a great movie. I found that very inspiring. But I think I can serve you better by talking about movies you probably haven't seen that were very impactful to me. And then I'll let you, Brian, talk about some books that have been impactful to you. And feel free to chime in, Brian, if you've seen any of these movies. One of them is a movie called Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, which is about the life of St. Francis. And it's a beautiful movie, very heartwarming. You learn a lot about St. Francis, and it includes some beautiful music by the singer-songwriter Donovan. But, we all know a lot about Jesus' life, but most people don't know the details of St. Francis' life. And it's a wild story. He was basically a rich person's son who was going to take over the family business. And at some point, he just made a total shift in his life and gave himself to God completely. And he actually became famous during his lifetime. He was not unknown. He met with the Pope, and they show that scene. And he actually really impacted the Pope. He's now this wandering beggar, but it's just a very moving movie and very well done. So I recommend that. Did you ever see that movie?
No, I haven't. But I of all the saints, and I'm not particularly religious, but of all the saints I can think of, St. Francis would be the one I would want to learn about.
Yeah, yeah. He really had an extraordinary life and an extraordinary impact too. Perhaps my favorite movie of all time, if there is such a thing, is a movie called Resurrection. And unfortunately, there's several movies called Resurrection, and you want to get the one with Ellen Burstyn, Academy Award winner, and Sam Shepard. It's based on a true story about a woman who had a near-death experience, and after surviving that, she had healing abilities. And she used those healing abilities to help a lot of people. That makes it sound a little dull. The movie is incredibly moving. I've seen it probably 10 times. And pretty much everybody I've recommended that movie to has said, wow. It's one of those movies. Now, I did have a near-death experience, so I relate to it on that level as well. But if you haven't had a near-death experience, you get a little bit of understanding of maybe what that transformation is like, going from, your normal life to seeing the world through a different lens, seeing the world through that, there's stuff that happens after you die. We're here for certain reasons, to share love, etc. And how people react to miracles. It's very interesting on many different levels. So I hope that you get that. I think that's available through Amazon. Third one that I already mentioned was the movie Peaceful Warrior. Ends up my uncle financed the movie. A friend of mine produced the movie. And I thought they did, the book was really good. I thought the movie was even better in some ways and has so much wisdom in it. As I said, I'd seen it 3 or 4 times and then I missed perhaps the deepest part of it. But it's a fun movie, and it's one that you can share with family who may not be spiritually inclined, because it has an interesting plot with good characters, and it's more than just a spiritual movie. It's about a young man going through his battle with himself, really, and becoming an athletic champion. Another movie that I thought was great that I already mentioned was Harold and Maude. A lot of these movies that I like tend to be where there's a teacher-student relationship. In Harold and Maude, there's Maude, who's kind of like almost like a spiritual teacher or a life teacher to this young man, Harold. And it's a very good dynamic for learning certain lessons. And when I watch these movies, I try to take the position of being the student, learning from Maude or learning from the character of Socrates in Peaceful Warrior. And that way I'm really trying to take in the lessons.
If they're successful, that's what they're meant to do. In other words, you identify with the learner, and you go through a kind of a hero's journey.
Right.
Finding that. And Harold and Maude I find particularly interesting because here is a young man, maybe a teenager, I'm not sure how old he is, obsessed with death.
Yeah.
And here is a woman in her 80s obsessed with life and living, and they have actually a relationship which was kind of scandalous to some people, but it's just so life affirming and but odd, offbeat, and wonderful. And Ruth Gordon is just a treasure.
Yes, yeah. So many wonderful scenes in that movie. Another movie that I like that a lot of people don't know about is the remake of The Razor's Edge, starring Bill Murray. There was an earlier one in the 40s, and there was a book, The Razor's Edge, by, what's his name?
Somerset Maugham.
Somerset Maugham.
In fact, the book's on my list, so.
Okay. Well, the remake movie was really well done, and in my opinion, and very moving, a lot of lessons, and definitely worth watching, and very overtly spiritual, but also fun and interesting to watch.
What era does it take place? Was it contemporary at the time it was made?
Yeah, it was contemporary at the time it was made.
Okay, so
it might have been, no, it might have been earlier, but wasn't. Actually, I don't know that now. I'm thinking it might have taken place in the 60s.
Yeah, I'm just curious because the guru that the young hero meets in India in the book was actually based on Ramana Maharshi, whom Somerset Maugham actually met in India. So I'm just curious whether there's any connection there in the new version. I haven't seen the remake, which I definitely must see. It's Bill Murray, is that correct?
Yeah, and he's playing a serious role.
Yeah, great. Can't wait.
Yeah. I'll just mention one more for now, and that is the movie Waking Life, which is an animated movie about, what would you say it's about? That's one you've seen, right?
I have seen it, and I thought it was really wonderful. But I haven't seen it recently. And then, as I mentioned before, I tend to forget. I remember sitting there thinking, this movie is so deep about how everything is just all connected. But am I wrong? What do you think?
Yeah, it's really throwing in so many ideas at you and seeing what sticks. So it's one of those where you can take whatever idea most appealed to, but it's about waking up and how asleep we are. And it's a little bit like My Dinner with Andre, if you remember that movie.
Oh, yeah.
Where it's kind of like a conversation between people in which they're having a very profound, deep conversation. And the visuals of Waking Life are just fascinating. It's done with an animation, but an unusual type of animation that keeps it very visually interesting.
Yeah, they used the actual film of live actors having the conversation and then created a lot of visual effects on top of this live action film. And yeah, you're right. It really seemed to me about how much more there is than we perceive.
Yeah. It's always good to get reminders of that. There's so many movies that I could mention, but I don't want to overwhelm people. I wanted to give you some that you probably haven't seen. You can go to Google and say 100 best spiritual movies, and you'll see everything from Bridge of the River Kwai to Gandhi. It's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but I really encourage you to watch some of these movies and to discuss them with people too, because that also is a way to enrich and enliven your experience of a movie.
Yep.
So tell me about a couple of the books that you have found most inspiring.
Sure. I'm going to start with one that's really, really old. It's called The Zen Teachings of Huang Po, translated by John Blofeld. And Huang Po was a Chinese Zen master in the 9th century Tang Dynasty. And this is not the Zen that we know of that came through Japan. This was before it came to Japan, the Chinese version of it. And it's about how enlightenment could be achieved by a silent mind and by putting an end to conceptual thinking. I loved this book. It is not so much about practices as it is about, or, about meditative practice, about sitting. It's not really about that. Let me give you a quote from the beginning and another quote to give you a taste of it. It starts out this way. All the Buddhas and all sentient beings are nothing but the one mind, beside which nothing exists. The mind transcends all limits, measures, names, traces, and comparisons. It is that which you see before you. Begin to reason about it, and you at once fall into error. And I thought that was really profound. And here's another quote. It is by preventing the rise of conceptual thought that you'll realize Bodhi. And when you do, you will just be realizing the Buddha who has always existed in your own mind. Eons of striving will prove to be so much wasted effort, just as when the warrior found his pearl, he merely discovered what had been hanging on his forehead all the time, and just as his finding of it had nothing to do with his efforts to discover it elsewhere. This book I found to be one of the most profound books, and also I was grateful for it because it's one of the earliest teachings that I was ever exposed to. And
I'm glad you mentioned that book because I did read that book. I don't read a lot. I just write books. I don't read them. Anyways, so I read that I was going to go into a Zen monastery when I was graduating college. And I remember reading that book and being very impacted. So it's back on my list of things to reread.
Great. Oh, glad to hear it. The second book on my list is probably has had the most profound effect on me of any book I've read. And it's called True Meditation, Discover the Freedom of Pure Awareness by Adyashanti. And I loved this book. And in the introduction, Tammy Simon, who is the publisher of Sounds True, in her introduction, she talked about an instruction she received at an Adyashanti retreat and how it was boiled down into two words: no manipulation. And Adya describes it this way: true meditation has not direction, goals, or method. All methods aim at achieving a certain state of mind. All states are limited, impermanent, and conditioned. Fascination with states leads only to bondage and dependency. True meditation is abidance as primordial consciousness. And the part that was most influential to me was that he describes meditation as containing two parts. The first is allowing everything to be as it is. The second part is what he calls meditative self-inquiry, which is how to ask a spiritually powerful question that can take you to the source of your inner experiences and awaken you to the truth of your being. He wrote, spiritual inquiry is redirecting your attention from your thoughts to the source of them. And I loved that twofold approach, allowing everything to be as it is, and then asking spiritual questions such as, who am I? Or what is this me? Or in what does all my experience appear? And
yeah, that's Aja's got well known because the simplicity and the clarity of which he writes and speaks.
Yeah. And he has plenty of other books. I mean, Emptiness Dancing is another one of my favorite books, but I only chose one by Adya, so I chose True Meditation. Yeah, I think he's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Interestingly enough, the self-inquiry, what he calls spiritual inquiry, is covered in my next book, which is a historical book. It's called A Search in Secret India, and it's by Paul Brunton. And this is a book that was credited with introducing Ramana Maharshi to the West. It's very enjoyable read. It reads like sort of a boy's adventure story. Brunton was a British journalist who left his career in the 1930s to live among yogis, mystics, and holy men in India. And the book is mostly made up of all the so-called holy men he encounters, from genuine sages to cunning charlatans. Some of them were tricksters, but many seem to have certain powers, like stopping the heart from beating, moving solid objects without touching them, passing into trances for days. And Brunton learns to distinguish among all the ones he meets, and he categorizes them into four: authentic masters with profound wisdom and transformative power, although I think the only one I can remember is the last one he meets. Well-meaning but ineffectual practitioners, opportunists exploiting spiritual seekers for personal gain, and deluded individuals who mistake their own fancies for divine knowledge. And so he's, throughout his whole journey, he's grappling with this tension between his rational, skeptical mind and his yearning for spiritual truth. But this deeper longing isn't satisfied until he meets Ramana Maharshi, who teaches the importance of self-inquiry and discovering one's own true nature. And so he came to understand that, the true goal of spiritual awakening is not necessarily to find an external master, but to discover the divine within oneself. And that spoke to me so much, on top of the fact that it was just darn entertaining, because he was right there, and he describes all these fascinating people, and you learn, throughout all the fakes and phonies or just the show offs, you yearn for something deeper and truer, and then you get it. So satisfying.
Sounds like a fun book.
Loved it. And it's a great segue to my next book, which you mentioned the movie of, which is called The Razor's Edge by W. Somerset Maugham. This is one of my all-time favorite novels, one of the few that I've read multiple times. And it's about the life of Larry Darrell, who's a young American man who he returns from World War I profoundly changed, because he's seeking a deeper meaning of life. And he rejects conventional success, and he goes on a journey of self-discovery, and he starts in Paris and eventually goes to India. And the novel is narrated by Maugham himself, who becomes a character and an observer. But he also chronicles the lives of a lot of the other characters around him, including Larry's fiancée, Isabel, and how she subsequently married Gray, who was a materialistic millionaire, and Elliot Templeton, her uncle, who enjoys being surrounded by luxury and sumptuous parties and appreciating the extravagant art pieces in his collection. And the book explores, I guess you would call it, themes of existential search, the clash between materialism and spirituality, and the complex nature of human fulfillment. And Larry's pursuit of inner peace through meditation and philosophical inquiry is contrasted with the conventional desires of all the other characters, raising the question about the meaning of life and the paths to true happiness. And of course, the character of Sri Ganesha, whom he finally meets in India, is based on Ramana Maharshi, whom Maugham actually had met in India. And so don't be put off by the fact that it centers on a spiritual search. It's so entertaining, and it's chock full of alcoholism, a stock market crash, opium addiction, and the glamorous life of rich parties. But just like A Search in Secret India, it's ultimately so satisfying when all of that glittery stuff is seen through, and the real depths are attained.
And you get a choice between watching the movie or reading the book, or both.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a couple more. One is Being Aware of Being Aware by Rupert Spira. And this is Rupert's shortest book. So it's a good place to get his whole teaching in one small package. And here's a brief summary. It's the knowing of our own being shines in each of us as the experience I am, or I am aware, or simply the knowledge I. And this obvious, familiar, and intimate experience has no objective qualities, and it's therefore overlooked or ignored by the majority of people. And this overlooking of our own being is the ultimate cause of unhappiness. So he asks, what's the nature of the experience of being aware of awareness itself? And this is the subject of the book and the essence of what he calls the direct path to peace and happiness. And I love this book, and I love the teachings of Rupert Spira. And this is a great one to start with because it's really slim volume. And the first book I read by Rupert Spira was really, really long, and I don't think I ever finished it as much as I liked it. But this one is a keeper.
Short is good.
Yeah. And I thought to tie movies and books together, the last one I'm going to mention is called The Zen of Oz, 10 Spiritual Lessons from Over the Rainbow. It's by Joel Green. And in it, Glinda the Good Witch is clearly a Zen master. And she sets Dorothy on the yellow brick road to spiritual enlightenment. And with Dorothy and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion, when they let go of their conscious yearning and free their minds to function spontaneously and in harmony with the cosmos, brains, heart, and courage flow easily and effortlessly. And ultimately, Dorothy attains Satori, the Zen experience of awakening, and she finds her true self, her higher consciousness, her ultimate oneness with the cosmos, and her home.
Yeah.
So, just like the movie, when she returns home, it's always been there.
Yeah.
The power to go home has always been there. The power to return to our true nature within us has always been there. So I thought that was a fun way to tie the movies and books together.
Well, I'll mention a couple books that really impacted me. One is one you might have heard of, Brian. It's called Adventures in Awareness. Have you heard of that book?
I thought it was similar.
Brian.
Oh, Awareness Adventures.
Yeah.
Who is that guy?
Awareness Adventures. Yeah. No, I thought that was so well written and had so many good things in it that I really liked it. But I'll tell a story of a book. Many years ago, when I was young and stupid, I decided I would take a dozen hits of LSD.
Wow.
You only live once, and I thought that would be an interesting experience. So I did that. And about 8 hours into the trip, a friend came by. They knew I was doing this. They were looking out for me, and they brought a book. And they asked me, what have I experienced? And I said, there's no words that can describe it. And then they said, well, do you mind if I read a section from a book? And I said, sure. And they read from a book called Starseed Transmissions by Ken Carey. And at the time, the words that she read seemed to correspond to exactly what I had been experiencing. I go, that's amazing. What is this book? And she said, oh, it was channeled by some extraterrestrial beings to this guy, Ken Carey. And they're describing the nature of reality and the cosmos and awakening and things like that. And I wondered when I wasn't high on LSD if I would still have the same impact on me. And it did. So I've read that book many times. It's very poetically written, and it has a very big picture of humanity and our place in the cosmos, including what these channeled beings or these other forces are trying to do in humanity's evolution. And you don't get that perspective very often, especially in such a poetic way. So that was one book that definitely touched me, as did both your books, Brian. So that's what started this podcast in the first place. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for your kind words about it.
Mm-hmm.
One movie I can add, you had a book, was The Legend of Bagger Vance. And speaking of seeing movies more than once, the first time I just thought it was an entertaining yarn. And then I discovered it was based on the Bhagavad Gita. the character of Richard Juna, Arjuna, was Arjuna, whose teacher was Krishna, but who was called Bhagavan in the book, and that's Bagger Vance, the Will Smith character, and it's about a golfer and his caddy, and Bhagavan Gita is about a warrior and his chariot driver, and the wisdom that this caddy imparts upon this guy and his life is really something special to be seen. Plus, it's got a luminous performance by Will Smith that not to be missed.
We're lucky that we live in an age where all these things are so available to us, and it's so easy to get caught up in the news and the difficult things that are going on, and including the screaming voices inside our own head. So I think part of our job nowadays is to surround ourselves with friends and books and movies that can inspire us and keep a worldview to reprogram us or deprogram us from the intensely materialistic, distracted culture that we live in.
That would be a blessing indeed.
Yeah. And the fact that they're available for, you can get pretty much any book on Kindle for a couple bucks. You can get almost any movie on Amazon Prime or whatever, or rent it for $2 or $3. And, along with a lot of technological problems that we have, that's a technological boon that we've never had before.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, almost too much.
And while we're at, I'll mention one more media type, which is music. I just discovered Apple Music. And they're all, whether you get Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, all those things, they're all the same thing. In my car, I can press a button and any song that's pretty much ever been recorded now immediately plays. That's a friggin' miracle, especially if you like certain music that inspires you. That's another boon.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing to this, which is just to put a little bit in perspective, the dangers of all of this, which is that the desire to get something from outside that we don't have or don't know. And so it can be, one more book, I mean, how many spiritual seekers do you know who have a huge library, just are addicted to books? And I was one of them. No,
I'm not sure if the word "was" is key there, but
well, the books that are spiritual I read now are the books by our guests, mostly. And so I still read a lot. And other than that, I read novels for entertainment on Kindle, and and so I certainly don't have enough room to buy physical books much anymore. Although I did just buy one that wasn't available, an ebook. But I would read book after book after book, and they're wonderful books, but I would always, the reason I was reading them was because I was unhappy and I needed to find a solution to unhappiness. And some of them were extreme esoteric books, and many of them were very simple, straightforward, direct path books pointing inward, pointing to what is already there, pointing to my true nature as pure awareness. And I live on the corner of 14th Street and Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, where for many years, one of the biggest spiritual bookstores in the world, called East West Books, was located. They'd since moved around the corner and changed their name to Namaste, and they have 2 stores now. But I was addicted to East West Books and would go and buy books and buy books. And then one day I walked in and I was overcome by this sense of, I don't need to learn anything new from any of these books. Everything that I've read has convinced me that all I need to do is look inside and be the awareness in which all appears, and that is where happiness lives. And I just started laughing, and then they didn't buy anything, and I walked out, and then I started going into the bookstore so I could get that feeling of, wow, I don't need to buy any of these books, how wonderful, and then walk out. And it was it's such a wonderful feeling. As much as I love books and movies, when you get to the point that you don't need them, that the wisdom is there inside you. That's what they're all pointing to. And then, sure, continue to read them for the different ways other people put the same thing, or just for sheer pleasure.
Yeah, that's a great story. That it's how you watch a movie or how you read a book, from what part of you, if you're feeling a lack and thinking that that's going to save you, that's different than just savoring the way that somebody puts something and relaxing into it.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have a meditation for this week, so the assignment for our listeners is to watch a movie or read a book that inspires you and pass on your hopefully higher vibes and new inspiration to those you care about. This podcast or something else.
Sure. And if you want to share movies and books that have been meaningful to you, feel free to reach out on our website, awarenessexplorers.com.
Yeah, I'd love to keep a list of that. And I plan to look at some of the books that you recommended, Brian. And that will give us plenty of fodder for what we say next, which is keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.